Around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. Coming up this morning on The Political Correction, we're going to talk about the thousands of people entering a 9th day without power following Storm Arwen. The Omicron variant, how concerned should we be? Plus, a second chance to see my world-exclusive interview with Donald Trump. That and much more after the latest news.
I'm Ray Addison, and this is your news at 10 o'clock. The travel industry has reacted with fury after it was announced that from Tuesday, all passengers arriving into the UK will need to take a COVID pre-departure test. The Business Travel Association has warned that businesses will fail and travellers may be stranded under the rules. The decision was made after data showed an increase in the number of Omicron cases linked to foreign travel. According to the UK Health Security Agency, 160 cases of the variant have now been reported across the country. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says the travel measures are key to helping keep the Omicron variant at bay.
And I know that that's a burden for the travel industry, but we've made huge strides in this country. We've got 80% of those over 12 double jab now. We've got a third of the country with a third jab or a booster. We've got to take the measures targeted forensically to stop the new variant seeding in this country to create a bigger problem.
Boris Johnson is expected to launch an inquiry into the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes in an attempt to avert similar tragedies. The investigation will consider whether guidelines should be put into place to protect at-risk youngsters during future national lockdowns. Social workers had seen Arthur just 2 months before his death, but concluded there were no safeguarding concerns. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life after being found guilty of his murder, while his father, Thomas Hughes, received 21 years for manslaughter. However, the Attorney General's office has said the length of the sentences is to be reviewed following complaints from Arthur's local MP that they were too low.
My view is very simple on this. We need to get to the bottom of how this happened, and we need to ensure that those who have failed him are accountable. But also, I think anyone reflecting on those sentences yesterday thinks that they were too lenient. My intention is to try to refer this to the unduly lenient sentencing scheme as soon as possible.
Illegal drug users could have their passports taken away as part of the Prime Minister's new 10-year plan to tackle drug-related crimes. Expected to be announced this week, the plans include removing offenders' driving licences and football-style travel bans. Tougher measures will also be put in place to break up county lines gangs. Meanwhile, 50 local authorities with the worst drug issues, including Middlesbrough, Blackpool and Liverpool, will receive increased funding. Boris Johnson remains concerned about thousands of homes still being without power more than a week after Storm Arwen hit the UK. Around 4,700 properties across northern England and Scotland still have no supply, with forecasters predicting low temperatures in the coming days. The Prime Minister has held calls with those leading the response, saying the government will support the recovery in any way we can. This comes after nearly 300 military personnel were drafted in to assist. At least 13 people have died and 7 are missing after Mount Semeru erupted yesterday in Indonesia. Several villages were blanketed with falling ash, mud and debris. 10 people were trapped after the eruption before being evacuated to safety. The country's National Disaster Agency says rescuers are still searching for those reported missing. And I'll have more in half an hour. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction. I'm Nigel Farage, and joining me today is Deanna Davison. Paul Embry. And from Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster joins us this morning. Coming up in this hour, thousands enter a 9th day without power following Storm Arwen. The Omicron variant, how concerned should we be? Plus, a second chance to see my world-exclusive interview with Donald Trump. So please do get involved if you want in the conversation. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can email or you can tweet at GBNews. This is The Political Correction. So thousands of people are still surviving without power, and this is now the 9th day after Storm Arwen caused massive network damage to parts of the UK, Northern England, Scotland being the worst affected. The latest national figures from industry body Energy Networks Association showed about 9,200 homes were without power on Friday evening. That's better now, but residents are bracing for near freezing temperatures. Well, anyone that's lived through this, I can tell you, I remember a few years ago being without power for 4 or 5 days. It is pretty miserable. And one of the people who normally is sitting right where I am on this couch is, of course, Deanna Davison. But as a local member of Parliament for Bishop Auckland, hers is one of the affected constituencies. We're going to cross now to Deanna. Deanna, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel, and thank you for kind of crossing over. Yeah, Bishop Auckland's been really badly hit alongside much of County Durham by the Storm Arwen damage. We've had thousands upon thousands of properties without power. Thankfully, I think we're about 95% now reconnected, which is really good news. But unfortunately for that sort of remaining 5% of people, as you say, day 9 now, no power in some cases, no heating. We have a lot of rural properties who rely on boreholes, so they're really struggling to get their water as well because that relies on electricity. So it really has been a huge challenge. But I think the most heartening thing has been seeing how the local communities come together to really support people. So right now I'm in the High Force Hotel at High Force, who've been kind of offering showers and food and a little bit of warmth and respite to local residents. You can't quite see it, but behind me there is a beautiful roaring fire, which is there to help people get warmed up. And this is just one of many, many stories of the local community really coming together to offer that support.
Yeah, I think in times like these people do. I also noted the Tan Hill pub in the Yorkshire Dales, the highest pub in England, finished up with people they had to stay there for 3 days and 3 nights. So they probably had a slightly more fun time than many single elderly people in your constituency. They're on their own and a little bit frightened. Do we, Deanna, I mean, we understand that these storms come along from time to time, power lines go down, we get that. But what do the power companies have to say about the fact that we're now in the 9th day and there are still people out there without power?
Well, Northern Power Grid, I mean, I'll start with a compliment and praise the engineers who really are working against the clock and against the elements to get these repairs done. But Northern Power Grid themselves have actually apologised for the kind of poor communications to customers. I think the length of time these repairs are taking shows just how bad the damage was. Guys from Northern Power Grid have said it's like nothing they've ever seen in living memory in terms of the damage caused, which I think really opens up a wider kind of debate about how much resilience we need in our power networks and whether we need to be doing a lot more to improve that infrastructure as we move forward. But again, it comes down to that point about communication, because if you know that your power is going to be off for, say, 5 days, and you know it's going to be a vaguely definite 5 days, then you can plan, you can go and stay with relatives or check into a hotel or kind of really make those plans. But the problem is there have been, people who've been told their power would be back on by 10 o'clock that evening. By the next morning, it's still not on. And 3-4 days later, they're still without. So it's making it so difficult for people to make those plans. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, does come down to Northern Power Grids, just through that communication point. Certainly in the early stages, we struggled to get the information about which communities were the hardest hit, because we had volunteers coming to us from all over the constituency offering their support. But without that information, it was hard for us to know exactly where to send it, where that resource could be best used. And I know Durham County Council have had similar difficulties as well, alongside the local resilience forum, really trying to get that information. Thankfully, now we have it, so we can allocate those resources and put the support in place where it's needed. But in my view, it's taken much too long, and there do have to be some very serious questions asked once everyone's back on power to make sure that this never happens again.
But it is being addressed, and the numbers are going down every day, yeah?
Absolutely, which is really reassuring. You know, I got emails overnight from people who said their power had come back on at sort of 9:45 last night, which is really good news. But, you know, we've been out delivering all sorts of help to people, from emergency generators to hot food and meals. We were out delivering sort of gas stoves and gas heaters to people. It shouldn't be like this in the 21st century at all. So we need to make sure that, one, we have a really resilient network, and two, that the power companies are properly equipped so that if any of these sort of disasters do happen, they can step straight in, get the support to the most vulnerable, get the support to the people who really need it. Because, you know, as we say, 9 days without power, and some communities potentially facing further power cuts right up until Wednesday.
Did you imagine when you stood for Parliament you'd finish up doing things like this?
Sort of. I mean, I didn't think that this particular scenario would be on the agenda, but as a member of Parliament, this is what you do. You're there as a representative for your local community, but also as a sort of leader for your local community as well, which means when these things happen, when crises hit, it's your job to step in, pull people together and try and help. You know, we did it right throughout the COVID pandemic, where my team and I set up a group of volunteers to draw together resources, allocate them to people who needed it, be it shopping deliveries, prescription deliveries, whatever. The storm's hit, and, you know, we've taken exactly the same approach, trying to pull people together, trying to get the right information. It's kind of part of the job, really. And it's, you know, it's public service. You go into politics because you go into public service. You do it because you care about your community, you care about your country. So, of course, at times like this, you step up. I think any decent MP would and does.
No, I agree with you, Deanna, and I just think it's a point worth making to those sitting at home, that it's very easy to condemn everybody who is an MP, but actually the vast majority of MPs in a situation like this do the right thing, and we'll cross our fingers for all those people in your constituency and across the north of England and in Scotland that they get the power put back on very, very soon. Now, I guess the biggest story that's dominating the news today, and has been now for several days, and is getting some people pretty angry, is what possible restrictions may there be over the new Omicron variant. Boris will apparently decide if Christmas is to be cancelled on December the 18th. Now, I have to say, looking at this, Chris Whitty, who very often has been deeply pessimistic over the last 20 months, well, he's actually been saying, look, I'm not that worried about it. Clive Dix, former czar of the Vaccine Task Force, has described the reaction to Omicron as a storm in a teacup. And it seems what the experts, I know we should be cautious sometimes of experts, but what the experts are saying is that whilst it's highly contagious, perhaps more contagious than Delta, actually the symptoms and the effects are far less. Now, one would like to think, as this virus mutates, that we're coming towards the end game. But in Ireland, overnight, we hear that nightclubs are closing, and across the rest of the European Union, some extraordinary things happening with the vaccines, which we'll come back to later in this programme. I have to say, it does seem to me that our government's approach now puts us on something of a par with Sweden last year, or perhaps Florida in the USA, where I was earlier this week. We are definitely, in terms of restrictions, using much of a lighter touch than most of our neighbours, which I think is to be welcome. Paul Embry, he couldn't possibly cancel Christmas again, could he?
I think it's inconceivable after the Christmas we had or didn't have last year. I think the idea that the government will again impose rigid restrictions in a way that means we can't celebrate Christmas again this year, I think is just an absolute non-starter. I don't think people would stand for it. I mean, I think, Nigel, you're probably right in terms of the restrictions being a bit more relaxed in our country compared to places in Europe, for example. Because I think with the COVID situation, we have been, you know, almost falling into a culture of what some people have called safetyism, where we just implement the most robust restrictions in response to a threat that hasn't quite yet materialised and which, you know, doesn't yet appear in terms of the Omicron variant to be that serious. So it does need a sensible, level-headed approach. There's no question about that. And I think it's right and proper that we haven't yet imposed some of the most rigid restrictions like some other countries have. Because the problem is this: I mean, this virus will continue to mutate, as you said, and we will continue, perhaps for years to come, to see variants. And if every time we were to impose mass lockdowns, if we were to impose the most rigid restrictions, compulsory vaccinations, etc., every time there was a new variant, then frankly that would be a never-ending scenario, and it's just a non-starter. So I would much prefer us that we did take an approach like Sweden, which I think has handled it more rationally, and I think it serves Sweden in the long run.
I think that's what they are doing, and at least I hope that's what they're doing. But Paul, you are quite wrong about one thing you've just said there. Quite wrong. You talked about the fact that last year's Christmas was cancelled and that Christmas parties were cancelled. Well, they weren't cancelled in Downing Street, were they?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, normally I wouldn't be particularly fussed about this kind of story. It's not the sort of thing I would want to particularly get worked up about, but I think the problem for the government is this: when you take such a hysterical line, as I think our government has done at times during this COVID crisis, and when you effectively say, look, if you meet Granny, you're going to kill her, and we're not going to allow you to snog people under the mistletoe, and we're not going to allow you to visit your loved ones when they're on their bed because you're going to destroy the NHS and you're going to kill people, then frankly you've got to be whiter than white. And if you infringe the regulations which you have insisted everyone else abide by, then you can't complain when people point out your hypocrisy. So actually, I think the government probably does have questions to answer on this story, and they can't complain that people are raising it.
No, it sounds like there's a dog barking in the room there, Paul. Maybe it's just the line. Arlene, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Something interesting here is about the vaccine. That over half of those that have been diagnosed with the Omicron variant are double vaccinated people. Does that give us cause for concern about the efficiency of the vaccine?
Well, I think when we first heard about Omicron, it was very clear that people said that they would need a couple of weeks before they would know the full impact of its transmissibility and the effectiveness of the vaccine. So we haven't got those details as yet. But I think just to be positive, because it's the month for being positive, we're in the season of hope, I think it's very important today to also say how good it is that this antiviral pill, which has been allowed to go ahead by the MHRA, the people who decide whether a drug can go through the country, has been allowed. So that means that if someone does take COVID, that they can very quickly get this pill. It's an antiviral pill, Nigel, and that then can help them stay out of hospital. I think that's something that we should celebrate this morning. I understand from listening to some experts this morning that has to be given to the patient quite quickly after they get COVID. And then if they take that, it helps them to stay out of hospital. I think that's really good news. But I also have to say that in terms of the government response, I think government are now saying, look, personal responsibility is very important here too. We all have a responsibility to look after ourselves. And I would hope to see more of an emphasis on personal responsibility. We all should protect ourselves from the Omicron variant or COVID or whatever else is out there, instead of having this sort of blanket approach, which frankly, when I look at what is happening in Germany and Austria, fills me with a little dread, I have to say.
No, and that we're going to discuss in a few moments' time. Now, Deanna, it seems that it's one rule for the country and quite another rule for the leaders of the Conservative Party and our government. But I remember sitting, watching that speech from Boris Johnson. Christmas is cancelled and tens of millions of people's plans changed, and people in tears all over the country, huge upset, and probably a year on, there are people saying, well, that was our last chance, last Christmas to see so-and-so who's no longer alive and with us. And yet Downing Street just carried on as if they were beyond the rules they were setting for anybody else. And I see that Labour members of Parliament, Neil Coyle and Barry Gardner, have reported this to the Metropolitan Police, who say they are considering these complaints. It doesn't look very good, does it?
Well, it certainly wasn't a party that I was invited to, Nigel, but I think that's more about the relations between myself and Downing Street than anything else.
No, I'm sure of that.
I think you're right. I mean, I think the optics are what really counts. And as you rightly said there, last Christmas was so hard for so many people. I can recall my mum being in tears after I called her to say, I can't visit you for Christmas. It was going to be the first Christmas her and I had spent together for 5 years. And that's a very minor story compared to a lot of other people. I think we need to kind of look ahead to this coming Christmas, as we've sort of slightly discussed on this show already. I would be very surprised if any restrictions were brought into the fore that meant that people can't spend Christmas with their families. I would heavily resist any such restrictions. Obviously, we're going to have the review on the 18th of December. But as Arlene said, there has sort of been this shift more towards personal responsibility, asking people to just be cautious and careful. Nowhere in government have we said cancel Christmas parties. There's been a thing saying if you think that it might be a risk, if you think there's going to be too many people gathering, then maybe think about it. But it's down to individuals to assess their own risk now. The vast majority of our population are vaccinated. Clearly, we need to learn a bit more about the Omicron variant, but the early signs show that it looks like it's much less severe than some of the other variants in terms of symptoms, which is really reassuring. And hopefully in that review on the 18th, we'll see that.
It is. Deanna, it is encouraging. Look, I welcome the change of language from the government, the fact they're now talking about personal responsibility. What does concern me is it seems this obsession with getting vaccinated is coming at a great cost to many other people. So in a moment, we'll talk about the instruction to GPs to focus on booster jabs and to stop a lot of regular care for over 75s. We'll also have a look at the European Union, which we're no longer a part of, where Ursula von der Leyen is now considering mandatory vaccination across the entirety of the European Union.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Get double vaccinated and all of our problems will be over. That's what we heard, of course, earlier this year. Now we're told, no. That's not good enough. You've got to have a booster too. I wonder how many more of those there could be over the course of the next couple of years. And my real concern about this is our obsession with the vaccine. A price for that is being paid by many, many other people. There is a quite disturbing rise since July in the number of people dying in this country, dying at home in most cases, with conditions that are not associated with COVID in any way at all. And I just wonder, this latest directive that's been given to GPs saying, concentrate on boosters, don't worry about regular health checks for the over 75s and other issues like that. And I do begin to wonder whether at times we don't finish up with perhaps the cure being worse than the COVID disease itself. What do I mean by that? I mean the number of people with misdiagnoses for other very serious conditions. The number of people who are now just not going to A&E or elsewhere because they feel the NHS is overwhelmed. I'm going to bring in Paul Embry to begin with on this conversation. So, Paul, we are saying to the over 75s, their routine care has gone because getting the booster is more important. Is that the right priority?
I mean, I have to say, I struggle to see any logic to it. As you say, they're being told to cancel minor surgery, to stop routine health checks for over 75s in order to push the booster. So what that gives rise to is a situation where the elderly and their healthcare is effectively being sacrificed for the young in order to give the young the booster. Now, there is unquestionably going to be consequences from that. We've seen over the last 18 months, NHS waiting lists at the moment are through the roof. You've talked about excess deaths. I mean, I shudder to think of the number of undetected illnesses and diseases, cancers, heart disease, for example, that are just lying there waiting to be diagnosed because people have been fearful, to be blunt, about burdening the National Health Service and their GP surgery during the course of the lockdown. So I still think, I've argued constantly, that we haven't yet seen the full consequence of lockdown. We haven't yet seen the full consequence of the government strategy. And I think when the bill lands, it's going to be a pretty high one.
I do as well, Paul. I'm very, very worried about it indeed. And yes, a waiting list now of 5.8 million people waiting for minor operations and procedures. And of course, that, despite whatever money Rishi Sunak keeps throwing at the NHS, that's going up and up and up. Arlene, do you have sympathy with my view that in the long term, the cure may well prove to be worse than the disease?
I do, Nigel, and it's something that I've been concerned about when I was in government, and now when I'm out of government, I'm equally as concerned about the issue. We in Northern Ireland have the longest waiting lists anywhere in the United Kingdom per head of population. It's something I'm very concerned about, the excess deaths that we've seen relating to, as Paul has said, from cancer and other illnesses that have gone undetected. And it does worry me. When I first of all read this headline today, I thought that we were talking about the GPs having less bureaucracy, which I would welcome, frankly, because I think there's far too much bureaucracy for many of our public servants. But then when it talked about not going ahead with regular checks for over 75s, that does concern me greatly, I have to say. And you have to ask, what value then are we placing on our elderly population? We have always said that the vaccine was there. Initially, when we talked about COVID, it was all to protect our older population. I have to say the older population is at risk now from other illnesses other than COVID, and it's something that we should be very concerned about.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And Deanna, as an MP, I know perhaps short-term power is what people are talking about, but rising waiting lists, 5.8 million and rising quickly. I mean, this does become a real problem, doesn't it?
It is a major concern. I mean, we get emails through on a weekly basis from people who are on those waiting lists and get told, for a hip or a knee operation, they could be waiting 18 months, if not longer, which, as a statistic doesn't sound too bad. But when you're living with that pain, with that discomfort day in, day out, clearly it means that there is an awful lot more to do. And I think one of the key things is prevention. It's catching these things really early. And, the government talks about pushing more emphasis into that, particularly with things like cancers, with additional screening. And there's a lot of work going into that side of things. But like you, Nigel, I was a bit concerned to see that, routine health checks for over 75s are going to be kind of put on hold in order to get the booster jab out. Now, the booster is arguably pretty important, of course, but there are so many other networks who can help with that. We've got the Jabs Army, we've got local pharmacies and those other networks who can really help. So I'm not necessarily sure it needs to be done at the expense of GPs going about their day-to-day routine activities, to really look out for people's health that isn't COVID related.
No, but we're not members of the European Union anymore, and I'm about to say thank goodness for that, because European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Wednesday said she's considering the idea of mandatory vaccinations across the whole of the European Union. And the Pfizer vaccine will be ready very, very soon from December the 13th for children. And, you know, this favourability towards compulsory jabs is something that has already happened in Germany. They've made the announcement already. Austria have made the announcement already. And she can say that it's up to the member states as much as she likes, but we know how it works in the European Union. The big member states put pressure on the smaller member states. Now, I may be completely and utterly wrong, but I think in the case of Austria particularly, they've bitten off more than they can chew. I mean, I've had the double jab. I can't say that I'm mad about the booster or a booster every 6 months or whatever it may be. But I do think to divide populations up into two, to say in Germany that if you're not double vaccinated, you can't go to the shops. I mean, this dividing up of a society, I think it's appalling. And I think mandatory vaccinations are coming to the European Union. Deanna, it does look that way, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does. Hearing what Ursula von der Leyen's been saying and looking at the response from a number of those kind of larger member states. And we've discussed this quite a lot on the show over the past sort of few weeks. I think we're all pretty much united in saying that mandatory vaccinations absolutely shouldn't be the case. At the end of the day, this is a medical intervention. It should be up to individuals to make an informed choice about whether or not they take that up. And in my view, creating this sort of strange two-tier society of those who are vaccinated versus those who aren't, you know, telling an unvaccinated person that they can't go to a pub or to a restaurant or to a cinema, it just strikes me as something that, you know, if someone pitched this 2 years ago, pre-COVID, everyone would have said you were mad. And yet we find ourselves in this situation. I think it's that element of mission creep. And I think people do need to sort of take a step back, look at the kind of realistic data and look at encouraging people to get vaccines in a more positive, proactive way. Look at the reasons why people aren't taking them up. Try and sort of dispel all of that false information to give people hope and more kind of more confidence in getting the vaccine. That's the way to do it, certainly not through these kind of more punitive measures.
Well, Deanna, you know, in this country, about 12% of adults have not had the vaccine, and I don't think whatever you say to them or however you threaten them, they're going to change their minds. And there is some genuine scepticism out there in the country, and we've seen 50,000 people leave the care sector because they refused to be told they had to have a double vaccine. So in the end, it is a matter of personal choice, isn't it?
Well, I completely agree. And I think in the UK, we've done a really good job of kind of encouraging people to take up that vaccine through kind of more positive information, through encouragement, certainly not through those, as I said, more sort of punitive measures. And we do have a great take-up in this country compared to a lot of our European neighbours.
Well, yes, you're right. There is much more vaccine scepticism in France, Germany, Austria. Now, Paul, I'm going to stick with the European Union because there is a story this week about the EU upsetting the Pope and the Vatican.
Yeah, this is the European Union, which has issued guidance, which apparently has since been withdrawn, where the EU is arguing that we should no longer, in communications from the European Union, that officials should no longer use the word Christmas, because not everybody is a Christian and not everybody celebrates Christmas. And therefore it isn't as inclusive and therefore should be replaced by a term such as holiday period. Within the same guidance, they also talk about abandoning any use of gendered words because people may not subscribe to particular pronouns, and gendered words could also be exclusionary. And yes, His Holiness the Pope has taken umbrage to it, not unreasonably in my view, because clearly it is complete and utter bonkers. The idea that in a continent that is broadly Christian in its character, you shouldn't describe one of the main festivals of the calendar as its actual name, seems to me to be absolutely ludicrous. And what strikes me, really, is it seems to me that non-Christians and minorities are not themselves clamouring for this sort of nonsense. It tends to be pushed by liberal do-gooders who think they're doing it on behalf of minorities in a very kind of paternalistic way. And I just wonder if these people would, for example, say that we shouldn't use the word Ramadan or we shouldn't use the word Diwali. Of course, they would never do that. It only ever seems to be Christianity that comes in for it. So I think the EU, once again, has bitten off more than it can chew, and it's come up against a very strong opponent in His Holiness, and you know, more power to him for taking them on.
No, well said, Paul. Good common sense. It's why the Labour Party needs you, because there aren't many like you in it. Now, I would never have dared mention the Vatican and the Pope to a previous leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, but I think I'm on safer ground with Arlene than I would have been with Ian Paisley. Arlene, this is one of the problems that we have, isn't it? We have a society with minority groups that are now significant minority groups. What do we do? I mean, what if, genuinely, there are lots of people who now live in our country or live in Germany who are offended by the word Christmas? How do we deal with this?
But, I mean, that's the point. I don't think, and Paul is absolutely spot on this, I don't think they are offended by the word Christmas. I think others are offended on their behalf. So I think the way in which we have been dealing with other non-Christian festivals, and I've noticed it very much this year, has been really, really good. We talk about Diwali, we talk about Ramadan now, we send greetings in Chanukah, and I think that's the way to do it. We recognise that there are other faiths living in the United Kingdom, but whether people want to wish it away or not, Christianity is still the main religion in the European Union, and I think should be respected as such. We can, of course, be inclusive of other religions. That's what we should do. But we can't ignore the fact that Christmas is a Christian festival, and it's one about hope. And I hope that everybody takes the chance to celebrate it. And we were talking about the chance to celebrate it earlier on. And I noticed on our strapline we were saying that the Prime Minister might cancel Christmas. Of course, the Prime Minister can't cancel Christmas. He can try and limit the celebrations, but he certainly can't cancel Christmas.
No, absolutely. Arlene, thank you. Well, all I can say to that is sometimes I do feel that our leaders are not robust enough in the defence of the Judeo-Christian culture that underpins everything that has made our countries what they are. Coming up after the break, after the tragic death of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, one MP calls for a review of sentences.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
This is the Political Correction, and Arlene Foster, I'm going to throw to you on this, over the sentences that were handed down to the stepmother and father of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, because I know one or two local MPs have said they think they're far too lenient. Please give us your thoughts.
Well, I think we've all been really shocked by the detail which has emerged about the campaign of torture, starvation, and eventual murder of this young child, only 6 years of age. And when the details have been put out, and I have to say I do feel for the jurors who had to sit through all of this detail for 8-9 weeks, it is really, really shocking, Nigel, that someone who is charged with looking after this young boy murders him in such a dramatic way. And it wasn't just the physical abuse that this child went through, I think, that really hit me. It was the psychological abuse that he had to endure for months from his father and from his father's partner. And I just can't take into my own mind that a father could allow that to happen and actually be engaged in the abuse of his own child in that way. And when I heard the sentences, 29 years for Postal, the girlfriend, and 21 for the father, I thought, well, why is the father only getting 21 years? Surely he should be getting at least as much as his girlfriend. Because, of course, he sent a text a couple of weeks before the child died saying, just end him. Now, to me, that shows intent to cause harm to this child. And therefore, I think it does need reviewed. And I hope that the Attorney General takes into account all of the aggravating factors. Because if it was left to me, Nigel, I would personally lock them up and throw away the key.
But I mean, 21 years, Arlene, what does 21 years actually mean? Does it mean sort of 11 years, effectively, 12 years?
No, I think he is actually going to be in prison and then he'll be up for parole, I think, at 21 years. I think that's what they were indicating. But I mean, from my point of view, I know when something as awful as this happens, sometimes we tend to look back and talk about, do we need to bring back the death penalty for child murderers? You can never make good law based on one case. So I think we need to always take that into account. But certainly, I think the Attorney General needs to look at this. And rightly, the Prime Minister has indicated that he wants a review of how this happened. Lockdown did play a part, Nigel, there's no doubt about it. I remember being concerned about domestic violence being on the increase during lockdown and vulnerable partners being the subject of abuse. But children were also very much vulnerable because they weren't at school. Their teachers or classroom assistants weren't able to view them on a daily basis. The social workers couldn't get in to see them. They were doing Zoom calls. And of course, we can all put on very pleasant views during a Zoom call, but you're not seeing the reality of the home during a Zoom call. So I think lockdown obviously played a part in this not being prevented, this awful, awful death.
No, I'm sure that's right, Arlene. I agree with that. And I must say, it was actually quite difficult to read an account of what had happened, let alone, as you say, those people who were there on the jury. It must have been very, very hard for them indeed. Now, today's Mail on Sunday dedicates pages and pages and pages to Prince William opening up about his mental health. Now, we get everything. Basically, what he says is that when he was engaged as a helicopter pilot working for emergency services, it was the rescue of a young boy that left him profoundly upset. And as a result of that, he's now saying that he's had mental health issues. Beyond that, he opens up a lot about childhood, about the music he likes. It's a big William opening himself up to the whole world, doing it predominantly through social media. And I just wonder what's really going on here. Part of me thinks that, to claim mental health, I mean, virtually everyone's doing it these days. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but virtually everybody, it seems, in public life is now saying this these days. And does it really help for the future monarch to just lay himself bare in front of the entirety of the British population? Or is it actually more to do with his brother, as if there's some kind of competition for who can be the most human out there in the public space? Because the one big difference is that when Prince Harry does big podcasts or interviews, he gets paid a lot of money to do them, and Prince William did not get paid a penny piece. Paul, we've talked about this before. We've talked about trauma in life, which everybody goes through, and I'm not for 1 minute demeaning the fact that anybody that works in emergency services, and you yourself, with your service with the fire brigade, will know that people can go through very, very traumatic experiences. I'm not for one moment trying to downplay that. But is it helpful for the future monarch to tell the world he's had mental health issues?
I think there's always a balance to be struck with these things. I mean, it's right and proper that we do see something of the personal lives and the innermost thoughts of our royal family. But at the same time, I have to say, I'm a bit uncomfortable with this kind of new phenomenon of members of the royal family, as you say, laying themselves bare. And constantly parading their kind of personal issues and their particular mental health traumas. And I just think there is a danger with this sort of thing, of what is known in some quarters as a sort of social contagion, where it almost ends up becoming some sort of fashion accessory. All these top celebrities have mental health issues. It's almost a fashion thing. I should have one too. Now, I don't for a moment underplay the seriousness of people who have got genuine clinical mental health issues. But I just wonder if people in the public eye constantly reinforcing the need for people to check their mental health isn't actually having the opposite effect of that intended, i.e. making the thing more prevalent in people's lives. So yeah, I mean, I think William does a good job. I think he's a decent enough guy. But I'm just I'm just a bit uncomfortable really with this constant parading of their mental health issues. I think it's a little bit overdone now.
No, well, that's how I feel, I must say. I really do. Now, let's stick with the royal family. Deanna, very interesting. There's always a question with people in public life about what the tabloids may or may not write about them, about what's reasonable. But, of course, this case where the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, says she's reshaping the tabloid media industry as she takes a big swing against the Daily Fail. And this, of course, is her court case with the Mail on Sunday, which, despite the fact that there were some grave inaccuracies to her testimony that were revealed, it appears she's won quite a big court victory. So what is it that matters here? Is it someone's right to privacy, or is there a public interest when people are saying things that may prove to be untrue? Which side of the line do you sit on this debate? Because it seems there are many, Deanna, quite senior figures within your party, even thinking we may need to change legislation after this judgment.
So I think I probably fall more on the right to privacy side of the argument. But with that, if you are claiming a right to privacy, that comes with a responsibility in and of itself. If you're claiming a right to privacy, but then happy to do a splash-all interview that's sort of shared internationally around the world, you have to think very carefully about how well you can defend your right to privacy on that basis. And I think that's a difficulty here, particularly in the Meghan Markle case. I think public interest is important, but I think public interest is important more so probably for elected officials, and certainly only in cases where there's some sort of hypocrisy, the hypocrisy in a policy versus someone's personal conduct or that sort of thing. But no, I'm definitely on the sort of privacy side of things. I think people's personal lives should be their personal lives. I think people, of course, have the freedom to share insights into that if they like. But I think you have to tread very carefully in that case if you're going to go down a court route and claim right to privacy.
Yeah, I mean, Arlene, if you're seeking privacy, then maybe doing world exclusives with Oprah Winfrey and trashing the royal family is not quite the way to go about it.
And you see, that's the problem. And Deanna's absolutely right about this. I mean, you cannot say that you have to have a right to privacy and then go on to a global show to talk about issues which are very personal to you and your family. I mean, I think some elected representatives get it absolutely right. In terms of keeping their families away from the public glare. And we've talked about how families suffer as a result of people going into public life. They're not the ones that are elected, but they are the ones that are under the public scrutiny. And I think that that is wrong. So the right to privacy should absolutely be protected. But if you give away that right to privacy by voluntarily going on and talking about your life and aspects of your life, then you shouldn't be surprised that the papers then report on that part.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a case of, I think, very much the biter bit. Now, a story that really has astonished me. Now, a coming together of Labour's Dan Jarvis and Conservative Johnny Mercer, and they want people who've served with the British Army, with the British forces that come from Commonwealth countries, not to have to pay for a visa when they enter the United Kingdom. The part of this story that stunned me, one was perhaps our ingratitude to those that have served us, but secondly, the cost of the visa, which I'm trying to get my head round. Paul, you've been looking at this story.
Yeah, and the cost of the visa is nearly £3,000, and I think that Dan Jarvis and Johnny Mercer are absolutely right to seek to move an amendment to the bill going through Parliament to make it clear that anybody who has served for at least 5 years in our armed forces should not be required to pay that fee. Because, look, at the end of the day, I think it's a very simple argument. If you fight for a country and are willing to die for that country, then I think it's pretty obscene to say that you should be charged in order to come to that country. So, you know, there are, you can think of the Gurkhas, you can think of others who might find themselves in this situation who have put their lives on the line and done an enormous amount for our country. And the very least we can do is to say, look, we respect what you've done, we respect your service, and consequently, when you come here, we're not going to make you pay through the nose. And in fact, if you look at the cost, Nigel, you're quite right. I mean, it's extortionate in some ways, but it doesn't apply just to the person coming. If they wish to bring dependents as well, so there might be a couple of children, it could cost them around £10,000. And I think in the circumstances, it's indefensible. And I suspect most people in the country would agree with that as well.
Oh, no. I mean, I think the cost of these visas, I guess, depends what country you come from. It's certainly something that I want to investigate a little bit more in full. Now, this time last week, I wasn't in the studio with the rest of the team because I was on my way to Heathrow Airport, headed for sunnier climes, in particular Florida, West Palm Beach, Mar-a-Lago, where I went to do the interview with Donald Trump. And it was an important interview for a couple of reasons. The main one being he had not done a single foreign media interview for at least 18 months. Yes, he pops up on Fox News and American networks, of course. But in a way, you know, Donald Trump, ever since he announced back in 2015 that he'd run, he'd get into the open primary race, it's kind of, there wasn't a day for 5 years. He wasn't in the news and part of our debate, and he's been silenced by Facebook, silenced by Twitter. And so I thought it was important that we hear from him. And I thought it was, you know, quite important for GBNews that we were the first to get that interview. And I just want to ask the rest of the team what they made of the interview and what their takeouts were. Arlene.
Well, first of all, congratulations on securing the interview. It's a tough life having to go to Florida and to Mar-a-Lago. But I thought that the chemistry between the two of you were very, very obvious. And he felt comfortable with you, Nigel. And therefore, when you asked him the question about whether he was going to leave all of his undoubted comfortable wealth and everything else behind and run for the White House again, I thought his answer was very telling, and it's certainly one to watch for the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, as the half an hour went on, he became more and more relaxed and more himself. Almost sort of forgot it was an interview, really. It was more like a conversation, Paul, in the end, wasn't it, really?
It was a great coup for yourself and GBNews in securing the interview. I have to say my view of him, Nigel, is completely unchanged following the interview. I don't like the man. I don't like his politics. I think he's something of an oaf on a personal level. But there is no doubt, look, that he does appeal to large parts of small-town, blue-collar America, working-class America, who feel left behind by globalisation and by the Democrats going off on this kind of woke agenda. And there's every chance, I think, if he stands again, that he will secure their support. And I think that's a huge debate to be had. It very strong parallels in Britain with the Labour Party as well.
Yeah, I mean, whether you like his style or not, Paul, isn't the really important point here that on China, we weren't even talking about China until Donald Trump came on the scene. And now we understand the grave threat. And he talked about this at the interview, the grave threat that Taiwan is facing. Hasn't he done the world a favour in waking us up to the reality of what the Chinese Communist Party is?
Well, I mean, I don't believe in an aggressive foreign policy towards China. I believe in having some sort of engagement with China. But I certainly think that Donald Trump is right on the question of globalism. And he looked at the loss of thousands of blue-collar manufacturing jobs in America. He talked about the need to revitalise the industrial base. He's talked about the challenges of globalisation and the downsides of globalisation for blue-collar working-class America. So on some of that stuff, I don't think it's right necessarily on China, but some of the broader foreign policy and economic stuff and how it impacts on small-town America, I do think he's got a point.
And Deanna, he is very, very, again, as I say, whether you like his New Yorker out there style or not, he's very pro our country and clearly very pro the Queen.
Yeah, very pro-monarchy. I mean, I think he obviously has that personal connection through his kind of golf courses and through Scotland, which is a really good thing to see. I'm afraid to say, Nigel, I haven't watched the interview yet. I was straight off air last week and I've been dealing with storm stuff, but I'm looking forward to seeing it because I'm always curious to see what Donald's going to say next. And between the two of you, I'm sure it was a hoot.
Well, he certainly had a big go at the wind farm sector and talked about how ugly they were and how energy independence made sense for the future. And I thought perhaps the most cutting comment on any individual was, he said, I'm not a fan of Meghan, I never have been. It's inappropriate for the Duchess of Sussex to be lobbying senators and congressmen and women. But he said, Harry's been used. I think that Prince Harry will regret this, and he's probably regretting it already. That was pretty close to the mark, Arlene, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and I think there'll be a lot of people in the UK who will probably agree with him on that, if I can be controversial and say that. But I do think that despite everything that Paul has said, and undoubtedly there's a lot of people who see him in the way that Paul sees him, isn't it still incredible that we're talking about him running again for president of the United States of America? And what does that tell you about the current incumbent in the White House? I think it tells you an awful lot.
Yes, it does, and perhaps it tells you even more about the Vice President, Kamala Harris, whose popularity is plummeting even more rapidly than Joe Biden's. And the Democrats, as a party, really in trouble. The Republicans, well, I would argue it's now become Donald Trump's Republican Party, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a reality. At least the Republicans know where they are. The Dems in big trouble, and I will, with GB News over the course of this year, be back in America and we'll look next time at the Democrats as these all-important midterm elections for November next year come up. So, as mentioned, another chance to see my exclusive, world-exclusive interview with Donald Trump. So please don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up on the Political Correction, well, you may have heard that I caught up with an old friend this week, and he had a lot to say. In a moment, you'll get another chance to watch my exclusive interview with Donald Trump, but that's after the latest news with Ray Addison.
I'm Ray Addison, and this is your latest news at 11 o'clock. The travel industry has reacted with fury after it was announced that from Tuesday, all passengers arriving into the UK will need to take a COVID pre-departure test. The Business Travel Association warned that businesses will fail and travellers may be stranded under the rules. The decision was made after data showed an increase in the number of Omicron cases linked to foreign travel. According to the UK Health Security Agency, 160 cases of the variant have now been reported across the country. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says the travel measures are key to helping keep the Omicron variant at bay.
And I know that that's a burden for the travel industry, but we've made huge strides in this country. We've got 80% of those over 12 double jab now. We've got a third of the country with a third jab or a booster. We've got to take the measures targeted forensically to stop the new variant seeding in this country to create a bigger problem.
The first at-home COVID-19 treatment could be offered to patients by Christmas in an attempt to protect the vulnerable from the Omicron variant. Health Secretary Sajid Javid is set to launch a national pilot of the antiviral pill called Labinjo after the UK became the first country in the world to licence its use. The NHS would be expected to deliver courses of the tablets within as little as 48 hours of a positive coronavirus result. Professor Lawrence Young, Vice President of the Medical School at the University of Warwick, says this speed of delivery is the biggest concern.
This is the issue, is about how do you organise this? And so the idea here is people with that report symptoms that are on the more vulnerable side of things and have comorbidities will be provided with the drug very quickly. And that's got to happen. And that's the bit that I think I'm a little bit concerned about, the logistics, getting that drug to people within that time frame.
The Department for Education has announced a national review into the circumstances leading to the death of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. It aims to find out what improvements need to be made by the agencies that came into contact with the 6-year-old in the months before he was murdered. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life after being found guilty of his murder, while his father, Thomas Hughes, received 21 years for manslaughter. The Attorney General's office says the length of the sentences is to be reviewed following complaints from Arthur's local MP that they were too lenient.
My view is very simple on this. We need to get to the bottom of how this happened, and we need to ensure that those who have failed him are accountable. But also, I think anyone reflecting on those sentences yesterday thinks that they were too lenient. My intention is to try to refer this to the unduly lenient sentencing scheme as soon as possible.
Illegal drug users could have their passports taken away as part of the Prime Minister's new 10-year plan to tackle drug-related crime. Expected to be announced this week, the plans include removing offenders' driving licences and football-style travel bans. Tougher measures will also be put in place to break up county lines gangs. Meanwhile, 50 local authorities with the worst drug issues, including Middlesbrough, Blackpool and Liverpool, will receive increased funding. Boris Johnson remains concerned about thousands of homes still being without power more than a week after Storm Arwen hit the UK. Just over 4,000 properties across northern England and Scotland still have no supply, with forecasters predicting low temperatures in the coming days. The Prime Minister has held calls with those leading the response, saying the government will support the recovery in any way we can. This comes after nearly 300 military personnel were drafted in to assist. At least 13 people have died and 7 are missing after Mount Semeru erupted yesterday in Indonesia. Several villages were blanketed with falling ash, mud and debris. 10 people were trapped after the eruption before being evacuated to safety. The country's National Disaster Agency says rescuers are still searching for those reported missing. OK, you're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, let's get back to the political correction with Nigel.
So my interview with Donald Trump was for just over half an hour, and it divides into 2 parts. The first part of this interview is about the November the 3rd elections last year, his objections to them. But more importantly, I think, it's about America's place in the world following the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the constant and increasingly bellicose threats to Taiwan that are coming from China. So let's have a look right now at part 1 of my exclusive interview with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. From the moment in 2015 when he announced he was going to run to become US president, Donald Trump has been in world news. He's dominated world news. Every day for 5 years, all over the world, it was Donald Trump has said this. Donald Trump is alleged to have said that, and what other people said about him. Yet something very odd has happened. Since the beginning of this year, outside the United States, he's virtually disappeared. Has he been silenced? Is it voluntary? What is going on? Well, today, we're going to find out. We're going to break that. And the first big foreign interview that Donald Trump has done, this is Trump Speaks to the World with me, Nigel Farage, here on GB News. Good to see you.
Well, I didn't know I was so quiet, but if you say so, that's okay with me.
Yeah, and I wonder, is that because of social media to a very, very large extent?
I don't know. I mean, I have not heard that, but it's possibly so. I have a lot of things to say, and sometimes I want to say them, and sometimes I don't feel it's appropriate to say them based on the position. We had a great election. We ended up, it was a rigged election, unfortunately. We got more votes than any sitting president in history by far, 75 million votes, more than 12 million that we had from the previous election, which was about 63 million votes. I think we've said a lot about a lot of things, and certainly there's a lot to talk about. If you look at what's going on in Afghanistan with the withdrawal, which was, I think, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, and you look at our borders, what's happening with our borders, you look at the cost of energy, we were energy independent, and we no longer are. You look at so many different things. You and I could talk all day.
Yeah.
And it's a shame what's happened to the United States.
But we've not heard you through, I guess, through Twitter. It was for you, you know, something that you used to massive effect. Oh, Jack Dorsey is being removed as CEO of Twitter because of shareholder pressure, but whether that means they'll improve as a channel or not. I mean, I was amazed the day that the Taliban, you mentioned Afghanistan a moment ago, the day the Taliban took over Kabul, I did put out a message that said it seemed ridiculous that their leadership was still active on Twitter. and yet you were still banned.
Well, they were wrong in what they did, and we're dealing with the United States president, who's obviously a popular president based on everything that you see, and them and Facebook, and I think they made a big mistake. I think if they had it to do over again, they wouldn't be doing it. We get the voice out. We have to do it. We have an obligation to do that. But he's leaving. I guess it was probably enforced because they're down. And also, there's no excitement on Twitter anymore, as I understand. There used to be a lot of excitement. Not only me, conservative people are leaving and being canceled. So they're canceled, they're leaving. And in my case, we used to get tremendous interaction with liberals and everybody else. And now they just say it's a very boring place to be, Twitter. And it's going down. The numbers are going way down.
No, they are. On the election, as you say, you got 11 million votes more than you got in 2016. Because we know what happened. 29th of February last year, I was with you backstage at CPAC, and I thought he's going to win 40 states. I mean, things were looking terrific. The pandemic hit. And then you kind of got criticised from both sides. Biden said you were xenophobic because you closed the borders. You said we don't want foreign air travel. We don't want this virus being brought in. The other side said you didn't lock down hard enough. I mean, difficult in a pandemic to win as a president, as a leader. But the real effect, of course, was, for the first time ever in America, tens of millions of ballots being sent out through the mail system.
Well, they use COVID, or the China virus, as I call it, to rob and rig and steal an election. And they sent out millions and millions of ballots. Nobody knows where they went in so many cases, and it was a disgrace. And everybody knows it. You look at even polls now, a big percentage of our country knows it, and it's very bad for democracy. Very, very bad for democracy.
The problem was in so many of these states, because they'd never seen it before, kind of what they did in collecting the votes wasn't against the law, and that was part of the problem.
Well, but they didn't get it approved in many cases by legislatures, and you have to, so therefore it is against the law. Wasn't approved by state legislatures. You can't do it even through a court. You can't do it. It has to go through the legislature, and the legislatures didn't approve this stuff, and the courts didn't have the courage to take it up. And so it's an interesting situation, but we'll see how it all ends out.
I mean, a lot of Americans, as you rightly say, a lot of Americans are genuinely concerned about election integrity. And I have to tell you, from my experience back in the UK, mass postal voting, leads to the wrong results very often.
Absolutely. Automatically, by the way.
It's a bad system.
They cheat. It's
a bad
automatic.
system.
I mean, they put everybody on, the millions of people on the honor system. No, there's tremendous cheating with that. And they've done studies on it. Everybody knows it. Every study comes out, you can't do it through the mail. You can't do it. These mail-in ballots are, whether it's your country, whether it's the USA, it's an open invitation to cheat.
But here's the problem. I've seen some pretty extensive private polling that suggests that up to 20% of your potential voters and supporters feel so demotivated by the message that it's been rigged, that it's not fair, that it's not just, that in Georgia, for example, in that special election, which was the one that tipped the balance in the Senate, there were a number that perhaps didn't go out to vote who would have done because they felt disgusted with the whole system.
Well, they felt the election was rigged, the preceding election, which was the presidential election, and then when they had to vote a couple of months later, they really did lose their enthusiasm, and frankly, rightfully so. They had the governor of Georgia did a terrible job, just terrible, having to do with election integrity. And they felt an election was rigged and stolen. And I would say they didn't have the enthusiasm to go out and vote. And I understand that. Now, one other thing, Mitch McConnell did a terrible job, because this guy's talking about $600 giving during this troubled time, and they're talking about $2,000. You don't win elections that way. Now, right or wrong, you just don't win elections that way. So Mitch McConnell was a disaster, and I think that really they did get a lot of votes, but a lot of people were discouraged. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. So looking ahead, from here, is the message to look back at November 2020 and to condemn and criticize much of what happened? Or is the message to look forward and try and make sure that weakness in the system can't exist again?
I think it's both. I think it has to be both. We have a base in Alabama, as an example, had 69,000 people recently show up. wherever I go, I think I'm getting bigger crowds now at the rallies, and you know the rallies because you've been to plenty of them. I have the biggest crowds I've ever had. And I think it has to be both, because if you don't study what took place and do something about it, if possible, I think they're going to do something about it. I don't view that as a foregone conclusion. If you don't look back, you really can't look to the future. But I think it's really a combination of both, and very strong to the future, but also it's very strong looking back. People don't want that to happen again.
No, and voter ID. I mean, for example,
voter ID is very
there's an overwhelming majority, and it's not just Republican voters, of Democrat voters who think voter ID makes sense and we've got to have free and fair
If we didn't
elections.
have as an example, if we didn't have what happened in 2020, all of these legislatures and all of these people that are meeting and passing voter ID now would have never happened. So, looking back is okay. You have to look both ways, but you can't forget about what happened. And if you did, you wouldn't have all of the things that are happening now happen. And there's some very exciting things, but one of the big things is voter ID. And you have to stop the mail-in voting. The mail-in voting is just ripe for fraud, and that's what it was.
Well, I'm keen to look ahead with this conversation. One last point about the past. 6th of January, which is something that your opponents gleefully seized upon, particularly, the social media giants on the West Coast and everybody else. And I know that you were willfully misquoted in terms of what you'd said that day. Because
in many different ways.
No, you were saying go in peace, and I understand that, and I get that. Looking back on the 6th of January, was it a mistake to have had that rally on that day? Or?
Well, I didn't have, there was a rally that was there, and if you look, it was a massive rally with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. I think it was the largest crowd I've ever spoken before. And I reverse it. The insurrection took place on November 3rd. That was Election Day. And before and after. That was, to me, the insurrection. And the January 6th was a protest. But if you would have looked at the crowds, the size, nobody wants to talk about that. I believe it was the biggest, and most people, and I've spoken to very big crowds. I have never spoken in front of a crowd that size. Nobody ever talks about that. And then, unfortunately, some bad things happened, but also the other side had some very bad things happen. And add this, I offered 10,000 and suggested 10,000 National Guardsmen. We want the National Guard to be there, 10,000, or even the military, because I knew the crowd was going to be massive, because I knew the anger that took place over the election being rigged, and I understood that. I understood it better than anybody. And Pelosi and these people turned it down. We would have had tremendous security, but they turned it down.
And that would have stopped people going into the Capitol.
It would have stopped any problem. Absolutely. They turned it down. Also, as you know, the police, I guess they say, were not given proper instructions by Capitol Hill, which is Pelosi. They were given some very bad instructions. So if you look at what happened and go back and really study it, they were so angered and so upset, and people crying. They were so angered by it. Now, if you lost the election, people don't act that way. But they knew that we won the election, and they went there. But to me, the real insurrection, if you look at it, took place on Election Day.
Now, either way, we've got Biden and Harris in office, and they've got plummeting poll ratings, and we've got a border crisis, as you quite rightly said, law and order, the Black Lives Matter movement, which is now becoming increasingly, I think, political, don't you?
It's shocking that it started off, with pigs in a blanket, right? You know that, right?
Yeah.
You know the expression, fry them like bacon. And that was about our police, our great police. And all of a sudden this becomes mainstream? I don't really think so. And Antifa, bad, very bad. And they had Antifa in that rally. They had Antifa leading a lot of people on that day on January. And I will say that it's pretty incredible that nothing happens to them. But the other side, this has been going on for many years.
So they're not just about racial equality then?
Well, I think they're about politics, but I think they're about a lot of other things. If you go back to their original founding of what they were saying, kill the police. What they're saying is kill the police.
I know.
And that becomes mainstream. Not good.
No, not good. We've seen specimens of it, of course, over in the UK, and we've seen Churchill's statue defaced and all of these things.
Well, you saw Churchill's beautiful bust being removed from the White House. When I got there, I said, send it back. They called, would you like to have the bust of Winston Churchill, a great one, right?
Yep.
Even you would say that, Nigel.
Absolutely.
And I said, I absolutely want it. Explain. And as you know, President Obama, I believe, sent it back. He didn't want it. And I said, let's bring it back.
No, well, Joe Biden got rid of it on the first day. Which
did he? Oh,
yeah. Which is why, of course,
surprised.
there's been no advancement with trade deals and all the rest of it.
I mean, why would you do that with Winston Churchill and you're trying to get along with your country and you send, it's such a token, but such an important token. No, I had it back for my entire time. It was there. I looked. He was a very handsome man.
He's a very brave man, too. But Biden, G7, Biden turns up at the G7, and this was before he let everybody down in Afghanistan, and which leaves us wondering, where is America in the world now? I mean, we've got big threats, haven't we? We've got a lot of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. We've got China, ever more bellicose in their statements about Taiwan. We've got Iran. I mean, can you believe it? Negotiations are going on this week with Iran, and the Israelis are very, very scared. Where is America in the world right now?
I think it's at the lowest point it's ever been at. I don't think it's ever been in a position like this. We're not respected anymore. I will tell you, there were no planes flying over Taiwan. And the name wasn't even mentioned. You didn't talk about Taiwan when I was president. It wasn't going to happen, what they're doing now. And they'll wait till after the Olympics, I assume, and perhaps something will happen. But it's not good if you're there and you have bombers flying over your country constantly, which is constant. With Russia, we had no problem. I had no problem with, you didn't mention North Korea, Kim Jong-un.
No, when you crossed the line and
I got along with him great. I got along with him almost as well as I
Little Rocket Man, you called him.
I did. But then we became very friendly, like you. Sort of like you.
He forgave you.
But you know, the truth, we didn't have a problem, and now you've got a problem with them too. You didn't mention that one, and honestly, that's a big problem because he does have serious nuclear power, and many other things. If you take a look at energy independence, we were energy independent, first time ever, and now we are going and begging for oil. We're going back begging for oil. We go to Saudi Arabia, we go to Russia, OPEC. We go and say, please give us oil. We had so much oil, we didn't know what to do with it. A gallon of gasoline was $1.87 when I left. Now it's going to be $7.50 in California.
Yeah.
And the big thing is going to be inflation, because the inflation, and it's hitting you too. It hits everybody now. But the inflation is at a level maybe that we haven't seen for, I guess, 40, 50 years.
40 years.
It's a big problem.
Well, that was part one of my interview with Donald Trump. And in the interest of balance, I also caught up with Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, who has a rather different view on US postal voting. That's all coming up, plus part two of my interview with the Donald. Please don't go away.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, the UK is looking rather cloudy and showery in the east, but brighter in the west. Let's take a look at the details. A few showers will feed into Cornwall in the brisk northerly wind, but elsewhere across southwest England, it's dry with some sunshine. It will feel chilly, though, in the breeze. Meanwhile, a much cloudier day is expected across the southeast of England, and here it will be rather showery too, with a gusty northerly wind. Pembrokeshire could catch an isolated shower, but for the rest of Wales, it's looking dry and bright, albeit quite chilly and breezy here too. Moving over to the Midlands, we can expect an east to west split. Towards the east, there'll be a fair amount of cloud giving some showers, whereas further west, most places should stay dry with some bright weather at times. In the northeast, showers could merge to give some more persistent rain with hill snow. Across this part of the country, the wind will begin to ease, so it won't feel quite as cold. Some showers will continue to feed into the east and southeast of Scotland. But for the rest of the country, there'll be lots of sunshine around. Looking at Northern Ireland, it's likely to see the sunniest weather of all, though, and the wind, I should say, will be noticeably lighter than elsewhere across the UK. During the afternoon and evening, it will become largely dry with clear spells and a frost. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
For being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
In the interest of balance, I also spoke with Susan Platt, former Chief of Staff to Joe Biden when he was a senator. And I started off by asking her thoughts on US postal voting.
Well, Nigel, thank you very much for having me, and good evening to all your guests. I did listen to your interview with the former president. And since we're entering the holiday season, I'm going to try to be a little bit kinder than maybe I normally would. What came out of his mouth was so much misinformation, reckless language, and frankly, what came out today was reckless behavior, where it just was a bulletin that he had been tested positive for COVID 3 days prior to his debate with Joe Biden, and where his family and no one wore masks. So let me just begin by saying the blatant disregard for people is just continues as it concerns him. In terms of voting, Oregon, I believe, for many, many years has had mail-in voting all the time, and many weeks up to and including. The purpose behind our election is to try to be as inclusive of everyone, allowing everyone to have their voice, to make their point, to make their vote, because it is a democracy. So anything that we can do to increase voter participation is a good thing. And when we talk about, well, people, it's rife for fraud or abuse, let's remember that many states did audits 2 and 3 times with very little, such a small percentage of any mischief going on. I think we have to continue to be an open, honest democracy where everyone can participate, and as easy as we can make that happen, the better off we're going to be.
Well, we've had mass mail-out voting in the United Kingdom. It was introduced 20 years ago. We have seen repeated court cases. We have seen people going to prison. And I would like to see, rather like France, where they just don't allow this to happen. Only 2 or 3% of the vote in France is done by people, who are being represented by a proxy or whatever. But here's the point I'm trying to make. You talk about it being a democracy and about wanting to engage people in it. But by the time that first debate had happened between Trump and Biden, 100 million people had already voted. So the point I'm making is, even without discussing the potential for intimidation or fraud, the point I'm trying to make is how on earth can people make an informed judgment on the election if they haven't even heard the debates? Doesn't it make more sense to try and get as many people as possible to actually vote on polling day itself?
Well, I think if it was a national holiday, maybe it'd make it easier. But unfortunately, there are people who work different hours, they work different shifts, they can't always get off on that day. There's lots of reasons why we need to have and make voting easier for everybody. And I will say, if we did that, I would support that. I think a lot of people would support a national holiday. But still, you're going to have people working who cannot get off. Voting in Virginia, it's voting from 6 to 7 p.m. Not everybody can do that. So let's make it open as we can. People can make a determination how they feel about the candidates. A lot of folks do make a determination who vote earlier, and those who are undecided, they wait till later. And that's just the way the system works. And I think it's a good system. Like, again, unless you have a national holiday where everybody can go vote, it's the best system we got.
Well, I'll tell you what 75% of Americans do think. They do think that when you turn up at the polling station, having voter ID, having a clear photograph official document of some kind with you makes sense, that it supports the idea that you have elections that have genuine integrity. So big majority of Americans, and that includes just over half of Democrat voters, think voter ID makes sense. And yet, when down in Georgia, it is suggested by some in the Republican Party that this should be the case for all future elections. We see very senior Democrat voices arguing against it, and even, to me, making the ludicrous argument that it's racist to expect people to produce voter ID. Do you see why, given the stance of some very prominent Democrats, it leads the Republicans to believe that the system is being rigged against them?
No, because not everybody owns a car, so not everybody has a driver's license. Not everybody has the ability to travel overseas or has a passport. So how are you going to do that? I think you have to decide, how are you going to give somebody an ID? Right now, you can go to some polling locations and bring your gas bill or bring your tax bill and say to verify who you are. It's not one size fits all for everybody. We're a big country with all different views and different locations and how we get and how we vote and different voting times and places. I think it's important to remember we have to make it as inclusive and available to as many people as possible, not exclusive. Now, I will say, in Virginia, Democrats lost the election this year, the governor's election, where we all hoped we would, because more and more people came out to vote. So you could argue that those rules helped the Republicans in Virginia this year.
Yeah, the argument I'm making is that I would have thought voter ID, in the modern world, people do have ID. I would have thought that it makes sense. Susan, finally, let me ask you two-part question. Number one, do you, in your heart of hearts, believe that the mass mailing out of tens of millions of ballots for the November the 3rd election last year was a process that was carried out freely and fairly? And secondly, are you happy for future American elections to be decided weeks before polling day?
I am satisfied we had a great free election. I understand, as a former campaign consultant, I understand election day is a moving target now. But you have to take that into account in terms of your planning and your budgeting and where you get your candidate and when you bring out your ideas and how you motivate people. Would it be easier to have election day on just one day? Sure. But that doesn't take into account not everybody can go vote on that day. Not everybody has the opportunity to get to the polling places. Some people have to take care of family. They have to work. They have kids in school. I would rather see a open, honest election, which we proved time and time again that 2020 was an open, honest election. There was no fraud, there was no abuse, and if there was, it was 1 or 2 out of hundreds of millions. I think we have to keep pushing the system to make it more available to everybody to go vote whenever they choose to do so.
There you are. After the break, part 2 of our exclusive interview with the former US president, including Trump's take on the migration crisis on both sides of the pond and how he thinks the problem is getting worse.
Should we stop the boats coming across the English Channel, in our case?
Let me work about how about if I just work on...
You sort this border out first.
Let me solve this problem first.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to get, plus Meghan, Harry and lots more. Be back with you in a moment after the news.
Hello, I'm Ray Addison with the latest headlines at 11:35. The travel industry has reacted with fury after it was announced that from Tuesday, all passengers arriving into the UK will need to take a COVID pre-departure test. The decision was made after data showed an increase in the number of Omicron cases linked to foreign travel. According to the UK Health Security Agency, 160 cases of the variant have now been reported across the country. The first at-home COVID-19 treatment could be offered to patients by Christmas in an attempt to protect the vulnerable from the Omicron variant. Health Secretary Sajid Javid is set to launch a national pilot of the antiviral pill called Labinjo-Hughes after the UK became the first country in the world to license its use. The Department for Education has announced a national review into the circumstances leading to the death of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. It aims to look at improvements for agencies that came into contact with the 6-year-old before his murder. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was found guilty of his murder and jailed for life, while his father, Thomas Hughes, received 21 years for manslaughter. Illegal drug users could have their passports taken away as part of the Prime Minister's new 10-year plan to tackle drug-related crime. Expected to be announced this week, the plans include removing offenders' driving licences and football-style travel bans. Tougher measures will also be put in place to break up county lines gangs. Boris Johnson remains concerned about thousands of homes still being without power more than a week after Storm Arwen hit the UK. Just over 4,000 properties across northern England and Scotland still have no supply, with forecasters predicting low temperatures in the coming days. This comes after nearly 300 military personnel were drafted in to assist. OK, you're up to date. I'll have more on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Time now for part two of my exclusive interview with Donald Trump this week at his home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. The strange thing is, Boris Johnson, and you've always been very generous about Boris Johnson, and you wanted to see the agony of Brexit not being completed. Well, we wanted to see that got over the line, and it was. And yet Boris Johnson seems to have bonded with Joe Biden over wind energy, over net zero, over COP26 in the most extraordinary way. What do you make of these promises for net zero?
Well, I think it's ridiculous. And I think wind is a horrible thing for Scotland. And I got to see it because I own great properties in Scotland and Ireland. And I look at these magnificent fields with these horrible windmills all over them. And windmills is a nice term, I guess turbines. And they're starting to rust because once they're there for a couple of years, they start to rust and wear out and look terrible, look even worse. And I'm looking at it and, you know, you're talking about a place that really has a lot of energy in so many different ways. You have a lot of hydro, but you have a lot of energy. And when I look at all of these things that need subsidy, because they don't work without subsidy, they need subsidy. And what so many countries, not just your country, not just UK, it's all over the place. You fly over, I'm saying, what a shame what they've done. Well, and you know that environmentalists are liking this stuff. I think they hate the world.
Boris says we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind, which is well and good when the wind blows.
I think it's a shame. I'm in Aberdeen. They built this ugly wind farm in the ocean. It's so disgusting to look at it. It's a shame. I built one of the most beautiful, one of the greatest golf courses. It's been so reviewed in the world. And now you look at, you know, not very far off. You know, when these things are 20 and 30 stories tall, the monsters, they can be far out and they're not far out. They're right on top of you. No, I think it's a shame what's happened in Scotland, in UK, all over the place. You take a look. I think Ireland's been better about it. If you want to know the truth, they've been tougher. And other countries are getting tougher. But wind is the most expensive form of energy. And remember, every 10 years you have to replace those monsters. And a lot of times they don't bother. You know what they do? They just let them rot. They kill all the birds.
No, but Boris is
so bad.
But Boris is he's hooked on
wrong.
this.
Boris is wrong. If he's going heavy into wind, I mean, you're telling me, but if he's going heavy into wind, he's wrong. He's making a big mistake.
He is. You've always been nice about him, but he's.
No, I like him. I get along with him. I've always gotten along with him. He's gone a little bit on the more liberal side. But I'll tell you, with energy, I'm surprised that he would allow that to happen because you have one of the most beautiful countries in the world and you're destroying it with all these wind turbines all over the place.
Yeah, well,
you don't need them.
I have to say I'm not a great fan of them. And net zero, what does net zero mean? I mean, you know, if the Biden administration, if the Democrats were to stay in for the next 20 or 30 years, what would that mean for the American
economy? I think the
economy?
carbon taxes that they want to put on countries and people and companies, I think it's ridiculous. And look, we have, in our case, liquid gold. They're taking it away from us by not letting us use it. It's liquid gold, and natural gas is very clean. It works out very well. But you have clean coal even, but we have resources in the U.S. that are incredible. And the enemy is making us feel badly about it and taking it away, putting our companies at a big disadvantage. We were at a position the likes of which we've never seen just a year ago. And now people can't get gasoline for their car, or if they do, they have to pay so much. It's very sad. Now, in your country, which I do know something about, I own Turnberry, I own great properties in your country. I mean, just great properties. I love it. I love your people. I love everything about it. I got along great with Boris, but I see what they're doing, and I think they're making a tremendous mistake.
You also got on well with the Queen. You really enjoyed it. You really enjoyed that,
I think she's a fantastic woman. She is a fantastic woman. I was supposed to spend like a half an hour with her. I ended up being there for much more than an hour, and everyone said, "Oh, that's so rude." But I said, "No, but she liked it, and I liked it. I'm not going to be rude." And we had a great time together. We then had an evening, the likes of which you rarely would see. And I think she was laughing and smiling. We got along great. We talked the whole night. She is a great, wonderful woman.
Yeah, well, she's been there nearly 70 years now on the throne.
Yeah,
it's incredible. And she's still head of state in Canada, Australia. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And respected by everyone.
Yeah.
And no scandal, no anything. Think of it. She's done this for more than 70 years. And she's never had scandal about herself.
No.
No scandal, no anything. She's an incredible woman.
No, and she's had a very tough year. You know, she lost her husband this year.
Tough year.
You know, they were married over 70 years, and she's been ill. She's, had to withdraw from one or two public engagements.
Hopefully not very ill, though. I've been watching it closely because I love her. I think she's great. You know, my mother was born in Scotland. My mother she came over here at about 19 years old, met my father. They were married for many, many years. They were married, they had a great marriage. But she left Scotland. She'd go back once a year religiously. But she was really somebody that respected the Queen. She loved the Queen. Anything with the Queen. When they were doing anything ceremonial, as an example, she'd be glued to the television. But she had great respect and love for the Queen.
Well, and hundreds of millions around the world.
That's true.
Respect this
That's
woman.
true.
I mean, in the most astonishing way. And I know your enthusiasm for it. Yet her son, Charles, who would be the natural successor, and you had a meeting with Charles, and it was reported by one of your former press secretaries that you were somewhat bored by the meeting.
That I was?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't bored. I liked Charles. I thought he was great. No, he's an environmentalist. He talked about the environment most of the meeting, which was fine. I mean, I understood that was the purpose of the meeting, and he was telling me his views. I was not bored at all. No, I think Charles is a wonderful person.
Okay. Now, somebody you may not think is quite as wonderful is a recent British export to America. And I think we're kind of quite pleased to have got rid of him, really, is Prince Harry, of course.
Yeah.
And Meghan living over here, being not only disobliging about you at every given opportunity, but actually the entirety of the Conservative movement. And now we hear that she's ringing up senators, ringing up members of Congress, lobbying for law changes, and doing some of this on headed paper that says the Duchess of Sussex. And we saw the Oprah Winfrey interview, and it turned out later a lot of what she said simply just wasn't true.
Yeah.
Should she go into American politics?
I'm not a fan of hers. I wasn't from day one. I think Harry has been used horribly. I think someday he will regret it. You know, a lot of people are saying I'm very good at the prediction business. I think someday he will regret it. He probably does already. But I'm not a fan of hers at all. And I think she's very disrespectful to the Queen that we just spoke about, who's such a great woman, who's such a great person, historic person. I think she's very disrespectful to the royal family, but maybe most importantly to the Queen. And I just... from day one, I never got it. I never got it. I see her, I listen to her. She's trying to do things that I think are inappropriate, very inappropriate. But I think Harry's been used and been used terribly. It's ruined his relationship with his family.
Completely.
And it's really, really, I think it hurts the Queen.
Yeah, and you can't use a royal title and get involved
Well,
in
I didn't know
American
she was
affairs.
doing that, but
well,
certainly
no, she has been doing it.
It's not appropriate.
Let's finish off back here in America. big victory. Youngkin, big victory the other week. Virginia, he won that race, won it very, very comfortably to be the governor. And what was interesting, I thought, was he was actually getting votes in Northern Virginia, and he was getting votes very much on just ordinary parents living in suburbia that don't want their kids taught critical race theory.
That's true. They're not believers.
Don't want their kids to be told America's rubbish.
Right.
You did well with your base. Phenomenal. I've never seen support like it. You did well with the black community.
And by the way, Youngkin, who's a very good man, did very well with my base. And I did a tele-town hall call, had massive numbers of people on that call get out and vote. And my base got out and voted for him. And that was a great victory for the Republican Party. And we have many other great victories that night. We swept the land. We had
they
had
big
tremendous
results.
success.
They were big results.
It's really great. Things are happening. Things are happening.
You got the black vote up significantly for the Republicans.
Right.
That was a big achievement.
I did.
You had a problem in suburbia. Suburban voters were a bit reluctant. Maybe they found...
See, I don't believe that. I think I did very well there. And the other thing, I did great with Hispanics. The Hispanic vote, for me, is legendary, the numbers. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. A report came out literally an hour ago talking about how well I've done with the Hispanic vote. A number that nobody's ever had before as a Republican. A number that's really game-changing. They're great people.
Yeah, and yet they, of course, who've come legally to America.
That's right.
Just as we have a border crisis, we've got these little boats crossing the English Channel.
Yeah, right.
You've got the southern border crisis. I was down in Arizona in May looking at it. I couldn't believe the scale of it. How big a political issue? Because in the UK, our border issue is becoming the #1 political issue. How big is it here?
So I got elected in 2016 because of the border and other things. And in 2020, I didn't talk about the border. You know why? Because I did such a good job, it was no longer an issue. But still, I got many more votes. So, I guess it wasn't as important. Now it's the biggest issue again.
Yeah.
But now it's worse than it ever was in the history of our country. We never had a problem like we have now with the border. I did the best job. We had the best border situation in the history of our country, just like I created the best economy in the history of our country. But we had the best border, and now we have, a year later, the worst border. Millions of people are coming in unvetted, unchecked. It's a disgrace what's happened. It's a very big issue.
Yeah, well, it is for us too. Should we stop the boats coming across the English Channel, in our case?
Let me work about the border. How about if I just work on...
You sort this border out first.
Let me solve this problem.
It is. So here you are at Mar-a-Lago, magnificent place. You've got your family around you. You've had so many great things you've done in your life, business, real estate, television. You've been the 45th president of the United States, and yet from day one, they made your life hell. The Russia hoax, a whole load of conspiracies, untruths. I saw you during some of that going through it. They put you through impeachments, mainstream media.
Two fake impeachments, Russia, which now turned out to be a total hoax.
Yep.
And everybody knows it. And they should take away the Pulitzer Prizes from writers that knowingly, in most cases, were writing about fiction. It was pure fiction.
Yeah.
Turned out that...
And Hunter Biden can do what he likes and no one cares. And we know all that. Why would a man who's got all the things that you've got...
Maybe your best question.
Why would a man who's got all the things you've got, great family, wonderful life, you're fit, you're looking fit, why on earth would he consider going back into that hell again?
So I love our country. I brought the country to a level it's never seen before. Then we had COVID come in, and then I brought it back, came up with vaccines that you're using, we're all using, the world is using, saved tens of millions of people throughout the world in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take 12 years. Just heard the other day, they were expecting it to take 12 years. And everyone said it wasn't going to work, and they work incredibly well. We've done an amazing job. If you love the country, you have no choice. It's not a question. It's just, this is a wonderful, beautiful life. But I like that too, because I was helping people. That's why I did it. And I think you'll be happy in the future too, because that'll be your next question, but you'll be happy in the future.
Well, I know you can't answer that question because it would start the campaign clock ticking.
Right.
But we've got the midterms coming up in less than a year. Are you going to be out on the campaign trail?
Yes, I will. I'll be helping a lot of people. We've been endorsing candidates. I'm 152-2. My endorsement, 152 wins and 2 losses.
Okay.
And those 2 losses were actually by people that were, the people that won were more Trump than I was, okay? So they won. But what happened is, what's happening is everybody, once the endorsements become very important, the most important and the most powerful endorsement that our country has seen. And so I have an obligation to make sure the right people get in. And we have many, many people online. Actually, when I leave here right now, I've got 4 candidates that want an endorsement. It's a very important job because we're going to have I think we're going to have a very big 22, and I think we're going to have an even bigger 24.
Donald Trump, thank you for joining us on GB News.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was Donald Trump unfiltered, and wind power was a really big topic there. He was firing his guns at that whole industry, and he said that Boris Johnson is making a big mistake by backing green energy. Well, again, so that you can hear both sides of this argument, I spoke later that day with Tom Burke, chairman of the environmental think tank E3G and former government advisor on climate change. I started asking Tom about the subsidies needed to make this industry work.
Well, it's part of the truth. But you want to tell the rest of the truth. We also subsidise our existing fossil fuel industries, our BPs and Shells of the world. They still get fossil fuels. Every nuclear power station on the planet gets massive government subsidies. So I don't know that there's anything very remarkable about saying that you public subsidises things. And what's actually happening right now is that wind power in this country provides the cheapest electricity available.
Well, that's all well and good, Tom, when the wind blows. But what happens when the wind doesn't blow? And very interesting set of circumstances that happened in Texas last year. And as you well know, Texas has put quite a high reliance on wind energy, but they finished up in a very, very cold spell, and they finished up with major power outages. And isn't this the danger of over-reliance? I can buy the argument that maybe wind can be somewhere there in the mix, but that over-reliance on an unreliable source of energy is actually strategically quite a big mistake to make.
Let me take 2 parts of the point you made. The first part about wind being variable, that's absolutely true. So is demand. The grid copes with that all the time. Incidentally, nuclear power stations are only available about 70% of the time. Nothing is always on, always available. So the question is, have you designed an electricity grid that can cope with that variability? Well, we have. You can clearly see we have because we haven't had any problems with it. What happened in Texas, which was the second point you made, was exactly that. Texas had a grid run on very, very fundamentalist market principles, which meant nobody invested in maintaining the integrity of the grid. So when it ran into extreme weather events, the grid collapsed. Actually, in Texas, the bit of the grid that went on working were the wind machines, because it provides the cheapest electricity in Texas as well, by the way, which is interesting. That's an untold bit of the story, but it's the truth.
Well, on GB News, you get all sides of political debate. I hope you found the interview with Donald Trump interesting and illuminating. He certainly wasn't holding back. I'm convinced, all things being equal, he will run again in 2024. Thanks for watching The Political Correction, and I'm back with you tomorrow evening here on GB News at 7 p.m.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, the UK is looking rather cloudy and showery in the east, but brighter in the west. Let's take a look at the details. A few showers will feed into Cornwall in the brisk northerly wind, but elsewhere across southwest England, it's dry with some sunshine. It will feel chilly, though, in the breeze. Meanwhile, a much cloudier day is expected across the southeast of England, and here it will be rather showery too, with a gusty northerly wind. Pembrokeshire could catch an isolated shower, but for the rest of Wales, it's looking dry and bright, albeit quite chilly and breezy here too. Moving over to the Midlands, we can expect an east to west split. Towards the east, there'll be a fair amount of cloud giving some showers, whereas further west, most places should stay dry with some bright weather at times. In the northeast, showers could merge to give some more persistent rain with hill snow. Across this part of the country, the wind will begin to ease, so it won't feel quite as cold. Some showers will continue to feed into the east and southeast of Scotland. But for the rest of the country, there'll be lots of sunshine around. Looking at Northern Ireland, it's likely to see the sunniest weather of all, though, and the wind, I should say, will be noticeably lighter than elsewhere across the UK. During the afternoon and evening, it will become largely dry with clear spells and a frost. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews@GBnews.